The killer of blonde girls, the tragic case of Millie Dowler and the scandal that shattered a newspaper. In Britain in 2002, a 13-year-old girl named Amanda Millie Dowler went missing after school, and her disappearance sent ripples of fear and anguish across the nation. The search for Millie gripped the public's attention, while the media frenzy surrounding her case became a storm of relentless coverage, speculation, and controversy. 6 months after her disappearance, her body was discovered, shattering the hopes of those who'd clung to the possibility of her safe return. But the story doesn't end there. Unimaginable truths later emerged, not only about the man who ended Millie's life, but also about the very journalists who reported on her tragedy. Revelations during the trial exposed how News of the World, a tabloid owned by Rupert Murdoch's media empire, had accessed Millie's private voicemail messages, violating her family's right to grieve in peace. This shocking act of intrusion did more than betray journalistic ethics. It highlighted the dangerous lengths a publication would go to chase sensationalism and scandal. This dual tragedy of Millie Dowler's case, both the crime and the media fallout, forever changed journalism in Britain. This is the story of innocence stolen, truths uncovered, and lines crossed. It was a normal day when Amanda Millie Dowler, a bright and lively 13-year-old, said goodbye to her friends and began her walk home from Walton-on-Thames in Surrey. Her parents had no reason to worry. This was the kind of suburban area where children could walk home without a second thought. But Millie never made it back. When her family realized she was missing, panic set in. Flyers were printed, community searches were organized, and police launched an investigation. Britain watched as the Dowlers pleaded for information, their anguish reaching the hearts of millions. Days turned to weeks and weeks to months, but no clues led to Millie's whereabouts. Her disappearance seemed to vanish into thin air, until 6 agonizing months later. Tragically, Millie's remains were discovered in a forest in Hampshire. This discovery was not just heartbreaking. It was a confirmation of every family's worst nightmare. Yet what came after was even more horrifying for the Dowlers and the public. Amid the swirling despair, the investigation turned its focus towards a name that would soon live in infamy: Levi Belfield. Belfield was a dangerous man with a vile history of preying on young women, often blonde girls who were alone and vulnerable. Belfield was eventually connected to Millie's case due to meticulous investigative work. His violent tendencies, already known to law enforcement, painted a grim picture. This was not an isolated crime. Belfield had previously been convicted for the murders of other young women, including Marcia McDonnell and Amélie Delagrange. In court, the evidence against him was damning. Belfield was found guilty of Millie Dowler's abduction and murder, and he was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. For Millie's family, while this justice brought some closure, the pain of losing their daughter would never fade. Paralleling the police search was the intense coverage by the British press. News outlets raced to cover every detail of Millie's disappearance, dominating headlines for months. The mystery of what had happened to this innocent 13-year-old transfixed the public, and the media fed this hunger with every scrap of information or speculation they could find. The ride-alongs with search teams, the interviews with tearful family members, even dramatic recreations, they all underscored how media fervor can blur the line between necessity and intrusion. Initially, the Dowlers cooperated with the press in hopes of finding Millie, but it soon spiraled into something far more sensational. For many, the coverage became less about helping a family find their daughter and more about selling headlines. And in this pursuit, some media outlets crossed lines that no one could have imagined. In 2011, during Levi Belfield's trial, an unrelated but monstrous truth was unearthed. Journalists at News of the World, an immensely popular Sunday tabloid owned by Rupert Murdoch's News Corp, had hacked into the voicemails on Millie Dowler's phone after her disappearance. This revelation was nothing short of appalling. The invasive act served to deepen the mistrust in the media. Perhaps most cruelly, the hacking caused Millie's family to believe she might still be alive. Journalists had deleted some of Millie's voicemails, creating the false impression that she was actively using her phone, a manipulation that gave her parents a fleeting sense of hope, only to crush it later. As the public processed this horrific betrayal, outrage grew rapidly. The focus shifted from Belfield's crimes to the ethical abyss within British journalism. Questions were asked. How had journalistic ambition outweighed human dignity? Was nothing sacred, even in the face of grief? The consequences of this revelation were swift and seismic. For over 168 years, News of the World had been a titan in British media, but not even its immense history and massive readership could shield it from the fallout. Facing an uproar from readers and advertisers alike, Rupert Murdoch announced the newspaper's closure in July 2011. This major decision marked the end of an era and served as a warning to other publications about the cost of unethical reporting. But this wasn't merely about one paper's demise. Through deeper investigations, it was revealed that the phone hacking scandal was far more widespread than initially thought. Other victims included not just crime victims like Millie, but also celebrities, politicians, and even members of the royal family. It wasn't a few rogue journalists. It was a systemic problem. The public outcry led to the establishment of the Leveson Inquiry, tasked with investigating the ethical practices of the press. This inquiry unraveled the dark underbelly of British journalism, the ways tabloids exploited vulnerable people, disregarded privacy laws, and pursued sensationalism at any cost. This was an eye-opening moment not just for Britain but for the world. It became clear that institutions meant to inform the public could sometimes exploit them, driven by profit rather than truth. The inquiry ultimately led to new conversations about press regulation, but for many it was too late. The damage was done. Throughout this entire ordeal, one group of people bore the brunt of every misstep, every delay, and every intrusion: the Dowler family. Losing Millie was an unspeakable tragedy, but the callous actions of both her killer and the media added layers of pain that no family should have to endure. Millie's parents worked tirelessly to honor their daughter's memory, while also ensuring the media and legal systems were held accountable. Their courage in the face of unimaginable loss was and remains inspiring. Millie Dowler's story raises important questions about the ethics of covering true crime cases. For journalists, there is a fine line between documenting tragedy and capitalizing on it. In their pursuit of stories, they must balance public interest with respect for the victims and their loved ones. For consumers of true crime, it's crucial to ask whether sensationalized content does more harm than good. In an age where headlines can dictate public perception, Millie's case reminds us that real lives lie behind the crimes we hear about. These aren't just stories for our consumption, they are people's tragedies. And as consumers of media, we must remember the responsibility we bear in how we engage with these narratives. The story of Millie Dowler is one of heartbreak, injustice, and reckoning. Justice was served with the conviction of Levi Belfield, but true healing has eluded her family. Stories like these remind us of the human cost of tragedy, a cost magnified when the media crosses ethical boundaries. Millie's case forever changed British society, not just in its fight for justice, but in redefining the accountability of those who tell these stories. As we reflect on what happened, let us honor Millie's memory by demanding better from our institutions, our media, and ourselves. Her story deserves to be told, but it must also serve as a warning, one that ensures no family ever endures such an undue burden again.